Patterns and processes of evolution include lots of different vocabulary words that we'll go through today. So macroevolution is what we talk about in speciation, the way species disappear through extinction, emergence, growth, and extinction of larger clades such as mammals or dinosaurs. These are macroevolutionary patterns, and those are the ones that are a little bit more speculative, hypothetical, because we don't see it happen. It's a hypothetical situation. People are theorizing, people are hypothesizing. Again, we're looking at fossils, of which we have very small group of individuals compared to the total number of individuals that have lived throughout history. Fossils are classified using cladistic techniques, derived characters that are used to classify living species that we talked about in Chapter 18. Fossils, in some cases, are placed in clades that contain only extinct organisms, and in others, they're placed into categories or clades that also include living organisms. Throughout history, organisms have faced changing environments, and the process of natural selection, if there's variety, we can have adaptations where we have new individuals that are best suited to their environment can thrive. They can adapt to new conditions and they can thrive. Other species, other individuals of a species fail to adapt and their gene pools die out in a particular species, or the entire species becomes extinct. Those rates vary among clades and from one geologic time to another as well. Emergence of new species with different characteristics can serve as the raw material for evolutionary change. We talk about mutation being the raw material. This should sound familiar to you from your social studies classes. If the birth rate of a new species in a clade is equal to the death rate, the clade will survive. If the death rate exceeds the birth rate, the clade will die out. We talk about this with a population as well, an individual population. This is a group of individuals that are related. The more varied the species, the more likely the clade is to survive environmental change, just like with a population. The more variation, if there's one or two characteristics that allow some of those organisms in the population to survive, that's going to allow the entire population to survive, or that species to survive. Clade Reptilia is a very highly successful clade. They're living organisms like crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds, as well, as we determined last chapter that birds are actually related clade-wise to reptiles and dinosaurs. Patterns of extinction are broken into two main categories. Background extinction is slow and steady. Sometimes there's a mass extinction that affects many species over a short period of time. It's said in some circles, some scientific circles, that we're in the middle of a mass extinction right now because of the effect of humans on the environment and how quickly the environment is changing, that organisms can't adapt. They're being wiped out at a very fast rate. You can see here a graph of how extinction has changed, the rate, over time. We see time passing here. We're in millions of years ago, so right here is present day at 0 million years ago. And then you see some of the different time periods with the geologic time scale that we've been talking about. And these spikes, the end of the Ordovician, end of the Permian, end of the Triassic, end of the Cretaceous, these would indicate areas of mass extinction. With mass extinction, you see entire ecosystem devastation, and collapse of food webs. Species again become extinct because their environment breaks down, and natural selection can't compensate quickly enough. So there's such a drastic change that even variety is not providing an advantage for one individual over another. Until recently, researchers were looking for a single cause for each mass extinction. The classic example of this is the asteroid that has supposedly crashed into Earth at the end of the Cretaceous, blocked out the sun, that blocked out photosynthesis availability for the plants. The herbivore dinosaurs couldn't eat, and then the carnivorous dinosaurs couldn't eat because the herbivores died out. And so this is thought to have caused the end of the dinosaurs in the dinosaur age. So that inference there is that the asteroid played a significant role in this mass extinction. What scientists are thinking now, though, is that some of the mass extinctions should be attributed to several factors: volcanic eruptions, moving continents, and changing sea levels. So multiple different factors. After a mass extinction, we see a reduction in biodiversity. So there's less variety in the number of organisms around. However, the survivors have less competition. They have increased availability of resources. So as speciation and adaptation produce new species to fill empty niches, the biodiversity recovers. It might look slightly different from what it did prior to the mass extinction, but biodiversity can recover, although it takes time, between 5 and 10 million years. Some groups survive mass extinction, others do not. Thought to be two different schools of thinking, or there are two different schools of thinking when it comes to the rate of evolution. The first is gradualism, just like it sounds, slow, steady change. The fossil record shows that many organisms have indeed changed gradually over time. So we see a slow, steady change. And this is just, the example here is common ancestor is this particular shell. You see a gradual change in colors, branching off. Now we have different varieties. The other school of thought is that slow, steady change does not always hold, that there's punctuated equilibrium. So the example here is horseshoe crabs. They've changed very little from how they look in the fossil record. So they call this a state of equilibrium. The crab's structure has not changed much over a very long stretch of time. Punctuated equilibrium is that equilibrium that's interrupted by brief periods of more rapid change. So this would be a little different situation with those shells. With the shell example, we have our ancestor, and we see one mutation here that branches that ancestor off into two main branches, and then another mutation that branches off again, and another one that branches off again. So there are periods of relatively rapid change in the fossil record, and again, the fossil record is far from complete. So scientists are sort of divided on which type of evolutionary changes really happened. Rapid evolution can occur after the small population becomes isolated from the main population. Genetic changes spread more quickly among fewer individuals. We see that with the migration to a new environment with the Galapagos finches as well. Mass extinctions open many ecological niches, so again, it reduces the population, kind of shuffles around the gene pool and directs it in a different way, potentially. Groups of organisms that survive mass extinctions evolve rapidly in the millions of years after the extinction. Sometimes we see that a single species or a small group has diversified into a clade containing many species. And these variations are sort of different riffs on the group's ancestral body plan. They might occupy different niches. These differences are the product of adaptive radiation. So, a process by which a single species or small group evolves over a relatively short time. This is the Galapagos finches as well are being described here. Adaptive radiation of mammals is shown in this diagram. So mammal ancestors down here. And then we see this branching off. And we're talking, relatively speaking, a short period of time. Adaptive radiation can happen with migration or when there's an extinction event. Species may also evolve a new feature that enables it to take advantage of a previously unused environment, so occupying a niche that had up till then not been used. Dinosaurs flourished for about 150 million years. The fossil record shows that mammals were pretty much there, but they were small and not a big part of the population of living things. However, after the dinosaurs became extinct, adaptive radiation caused this explosion of the diversity of mammals of the Cenozoic era. Like I said a couple slides ago, the Galapagos finches are an example of adaptive radiation. And then honey creepers, another bird species in Hawaii, have had this evolution of different beak size, different behaviors that enable them to take advantage of different kinds of food that are available in different areas of those island systems. Another type of evolution is called convergent evolution. This is where groups of organisms evolve in different places or at different times, but similar environments. We talked way back about the large birds of the grasslands of the different continents. The emu in Australia, the ostrich in Africa. They start out with different structures, but there are similar selection pressures that natural selection will mold different body structures in ways that perform similar functions. So they might end up looking similar. Distantly related organisms can produce similar structures and characteristics. This can happen in plants and animals, convergent evolution. There are 5 different regions of the world that contain mammals that feed on ants and termites. They're not related to each other closely, genetically. They have powerful front claws, long hairless snouts, a tongue covered with sticky saliva. These are all necessary adaptations for hunting and eating insects. So you see on 5 different areas on this map, there are species that, again, they're not genetically related to one another, but the selection pressure in these 5 different areas of the world are similar, such that if there's a mutation that creates this adaptation, that particular member of the population will survive and reproduce because it is best suited to its environment. Another example of evolution is coevolution. If you look at that word, the prefix co means together. 2 species that are evolving in response to changes in each other. Let's take a look at some examples of that. Flowers and pollinators is a pretty easy one there. Darwin discovered an orchid whose flowers had a 40-centimeter long structure called a spur with a supply of nectar at the bottom. Well, how in the world is an insect, a bird, with any normal looking insect or bird, how would you imagine that a 40-centimeter long flower, how would they get to it, the nectar at the bottom? So he was hypothesizing that some pollinating insect with a structure adapted to that would allow it to reach that nectar. Darwin never saw it, though, when he was there on the Galapagos. 40 years later, however, researchers discovered a moth with a 40-centimeter long feeding tube that matched Darwin's prediction. Plants and herbivorous insects also demonstrate coevolution. Many plants have evolved bad-tasting or poisonous compounds that discourage insects from eating them. Once plants begin to produce poisons, natural selection on the herbivorous insects would favor mutants that could somehow get around those poisons. They alter, inactivate, or eliminate those, or use it to their advantage. In terms of monarch caterpillars, monarch caterpillars feed upon milkweed plants. The caterpillars tolerate the toxin, but they also store it in their body tissues to use as a defense against their predators. So they use it to their advantage.